Most people think that their dog just isn't listening sometimes, that they're being stubborn or distracted, or they're just being difficult for some reason. But here's the reality that most people never hear. In a lot of cases, honestly almost all cases, the dog is not the problem. It's the human. And I don't mean this in a negative way. Honestly, it's great news even, because if the problem is in the human, that means it's a lot easier to fix than if it would be in the dog. What makes this part tricky is that a lot of these mistakes don't look like mistakes necessarily. They feel logical, they feel natural and even normal, at least to us. Sometimes they even feel like they're working in the moment, but over time they can slowly build worse and worse behavior. So in this video we are breaking down 10 of the most common dog training mistakes, and more importantly, I'm going to show you what's happening from the dog's perspective. Because the moment you understand that, training becomes so much simpler. And don't worry, all of these mistakes I have made myself in the past. And some of them I even still catch myself doing. Don't worry too much about fixing all of these things completely. Just try to be aware of them so that you can catch yourself doing them when you do it. That being said, let's start with one that almost every dog owner does without realizing it, and that's repeating commands. If you tell your dog to sit and nothing happens, and you say it again and still nothing happens, until eventually you get frustrated and start yelling the command sit, and finally the dog sits. From your perspective, it feels like it finally worked. You asked, you insisted, and eventually the dog listened. But from the dog's perspective, she's watching people play soccer outside, so she's a bit focused. But from the dog's perspective, something completely different just happened. Because dogs don't understand the repetition as emphasis. They don't hear, oh, the human is getting serious now, maybe I should listen right now. They see patterns. And the pattern you just created is that they can ignore the first and second command. Maybe they should start paying attention when you ask it the third time, but the fourth command, that's when they really need to respond. So instead of teaching sit means sit, you've accidentally taught them something like sit means... Yeah? You've accidentally taught them something like sit means sit eventually. And that small difference, that can spread into everything. Like your recall. Come doesn't mean come anymore. It means that you can take your time and just whenever it fits you, whenever it suits you best, then please come towards me. Leave it becomes something that's optional. Now imagine that in a real situation. When your dog is about to run towards something dangerous, you yell come and your dog hesitates. That hesitation didn't come out of nowhere, it was trained. And as I said earlier, these mistakes I made myself too. I thought my dog's recall was pretty decent a couple of years ago, until one day on holiday we were walking in a forest, off leash, and suddenly my dogs saw something. I don't know what it was, maybe a deer, maybe a rabbit, but they saw or heard something, and suddenly, without warning, they bolted. And I tried to call them, but that was a horrible time to realize that my recall was not as strong as I thought it was. And I lost my dogs for about 20 minutes until they eventually came back. And that was simply because I was not clear enough. I was repeating commands, I was mixing commands. Sometimes I would say come and then followed by come here and so on. So when we got home I trained the recall again, and now with the here command. And the difference is very clear. When she is out peeing late at night, for example, and I say come, she knows that she can finish her pee, sniff around a bit, and then eventually come, because I will close the door for the night. But if I would yell here, she immediately stops peeing and runs towards me. A couple of months later after that incident, the same thing happened. We were walking through a forest off leash. She saw something and suddenly bolted again. And I yelled, "Eowyn, here!" And she immediately turned around and ran towards me. Repeating commands don't create obedience, they just create delay. And now here's the part that confuses people. Sometimes it looks like it works, because the dog does sit eventually, but what you're reinforcing is the delay in the behavior. And that's the real lesson. You are teaching the eventually. So what should you do instead? You say it once. Every command you just say the name of your dog and then the command once. Calm and clear. You make sure that you have the dog's attention beforehand, before you ask the command, so you know that they can listen. And if your dog doesn't respond, you don't repeat it. Instead, you try to lure your dog in the position. Maybe the environment is a bit too difficult and you should do a full reset. Maybe the dog isn't focused. Maybe just the training isn't solid enough yet. But you do not turn one command into 4, because clarity will always beat repetition. And this next mistake builds directly on top of that one, but it goes even further. Imagine you walk into a room and there's something destroyed on the floor. Trash, a shoe, something that's torn apart. And your dog looks at you with its ears back, body low, avoiding eye contact. And it feels like they know. So you correct them. And again, from your perspective, it makes perfect sense. They did something wrong. You show disapproval by correcting them, and then hopefully they won't do it again. But there's a problem. Dogs don't connect past actions to current consequences, unless it happens immediately. And when I say immediately, I mean within seconds, not even minutes. Not when you come home, not after you discover the mess. So, what is the dog actually learning in that moment? Not that I destroyed something earlier and now I'm being corrected for that. What they're actually learning is, when my owner comes in and sees this environment, something negative might happen. Or even worse, when my owner comes in and I'm here, something negative might happen. And that is how you start creating dogs that avoid you, that hide things from you. Dogs that act nervous around you when you come home. And the behavior itself, the destroying things, often it doesn't just stop. And that classic guilty look, it's not guilt, it's anticipation. Dogs cannot feel guilt, they lack the moral reasoning for that. They just observe or have learned your body language, your tone, and they are reacting to you, not to what they did in the past. So what's the fix here? Simple. If you didn't catch it happening, you missed a training moment. That moment is gone and it won't come back. So just shift your focus to prevention instead and setting up the dog for success the next time. And speaking of how we communicate with dogs, the next one is one that quietly damages one of the most important signals you have. Just say your dog's name out loud for a second. And now think what usually follows it. For a lot of people, it's something like, "Eowyn, no, Eowyn, stop. Eowyn, what are you doing?" So then what does that name become? It's not a positive signal anymore. It's not even a neutral cue. It starts to become something negative. Or at least the start of something negative. And over time, your dog learns that. And their name starts predicting pressure, stress, or even a correction. So, what happens then when you call them in a neutral situation? You yell your dog's name, Eowyn, and they already start to hesitate. Or even completely ignore you. Or if you want them to do something, they don't fully commit. Because the name no longer just means, "Hey, pay attention to me, something good might happen." It means something's coming. And it might not be a positive thing. And that's a problem. Because the name is one of the most powerful tools you have. It should cut through any distraction. It should immediately grab your dog's attention. But it only works if your dog's name stays clean. So again, the rule is very simple. The name means one thing. Pay attention to me, and that's it. No emotion or no correction afterward that's attached to the name. After all, you probably did not teach your dog what no or stop even means. So simply don't yell it. Ask your dog for something that it knows instead. Like in my previous example, where my dog ran away, I did not yell, "Eowyn, no, stop!" I yelled, "Eowyn, here." Her name to grab her attention, followed by a command that she knows and thus she can listen to. And she got rewarded for following it. Now, let's zoom out a bit, because this next mistake doesn't happen in just one moment. One day, your dog might be allowed on the couch, but then the next day, some guests come over, you've cleaned the house, and they're not allowed on the couch anymore. But then when the guests leave, then your dog is allowed on the couch again. And from your perspective, it might feel flexible, maybe even fair, but from the dog's perspective, it's just very unpredictable. And dogs do not do well with unpredictable. They're constantly trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. What gets rewarded and what gets corrected. But if the answer keeps changing, then the dog doesn't become more obedient, they just start testing more, because the system isn't clear. And this is where people start using words like stubborn, dominant, not listening, but in reality the dog is just trying to understand inconsistent information. Consistency removes friction, but inconsistency creates confusion. And confusion often looks like bad behavior, where your dog might do something that you know they're not allowed to do. But when you think back, or maybe it wasn't even you, maybe it was another family member that messed it up while you were at work. To the dog, it simply was not clear. So again, the fix here is very simple. You just pick a rule and you stick to it every single time. Not when it's convenient, not when you feel like it, every time. Because clarity is what creates reliability. So when you decide on a rule, think about every single moment where that rule could apply that is inconvenient to you. Sit with your family and talk about every rule you want to implement. Every single rule, you should make sure that your family or everyone that interacts with the dog on a daily basis is on the same page. And now, here's where things get a little bit uncomfortable. Because this next mistake is one that feels like you are doing the right thing. Let's say your dog jumps up on you when you get home, so you push them off and you say no. You look at them and you talk to them. Again, from your perspective, you're just correcting the behavior. But you always need to think about the dog's perspective. And there you just gave your dog exactly what they wanted. Attention. And attention is one of the strongest rewards there is. Dogs do not categorize between good or bad attention the way we do. They just categorize it as I did something and this happened. And that's it. So if your dog jumps up to you to greet you, ask yourself, why is my dog doing this? What does he want? And if it's to greet you, it's most likely attention. And so what do you give him when you push him off and yell no? Exactly that attention that he jumped up for. So of course your dog will jump again. Because it worked the last time. Even if the attention you gave was, in your opinion, negative. Even if you're saying stop. Even if you're annoyed. It just does not matter to the dog. The dog achieved its goal, and that is reinforcement. And sometimes it's not as clear, sometimes it's a lot more subtle. Let's say leash pulling. if your dog pulls forward and then reaches the thing that they wanted to reach by pulling, even if it's a smell or a location or even just a direction, maybe they did not even reach the goal but they just went into that direction, then they succeeded. And then pulling becomes a strategy. And that is how behaviors feel like they're just getting worse over time, but that's because they are being reinforced consistently. Maybe not intentionally, but still consistently. So the question you need to start asking yourself is, why does my dog do this? What does my dog want? What is my dog getting out of this behavior? And if the answer is anything positive, attention, movement, access, interaction, even if it's in a negative sense to you, that behavior is being reinforced every time. The fix isn't just correcting the dog, it's removing the reward and then rewarding the behavior you actually want instead. Because dogs repeat what works. And now, even if you fix that, there's another mistake that can completely shut down learning altogether. Imagine you go outside to train and suddenly your dog just isn't the same dog anymore. Inside, perfect, but outside your dog is just gone, completely ignoring you, pulling, sniffing everywhere, completely locked into the environment. So what do people think? They just think that they are choosing not to listen. But that's not what's actually happening. Your dog isn't choosing to ignore you, they're just unable to focus, because they're over their threshold. And a threshold is the point where a dog... she just snored. And the dog's threshold is the point where a dog goes from thinking and processing and learning to reacting. And once they cross that line, learning just shuts down completely. And now you're competing with the environment, you're not just training anymore. And you are losing. Because the environment is a lot stronger than you in that moment. There's more smells, more movement, more stimulation. So what happens? You start repeating your commands again, you get frustrated, the dog gets even more overwhelmed and just nothing improves. In fact, that's when it often gets worse. Because now training becomes something that is associated with stress. So what's the fix here? Simple, you just do not train at that limit. You always train below the limit, where the dog can still think, where they can still respond, and where success is possible. Learning comes in 4 phases, and you might already have the acquisition and fluency phase down. But a lot of people forget the generalization phase, where you gradually make things more difficult. By adding distance, or adding more distractions, or increasing the duration of a certain exercise, step by step. Because training is gradual, it's about slowly building them up so they can succeed later. And this goes not only for commands, but also for socialization or putting on a muzzle. Everything you teach your dog, you have to gradually generalize. The most common complaint I get at the dog school, especially with the puppies, is that the dog listens perfectly at home, but here, when we're at school, they don't listen at all anymore. And the owners get very frustrated. And I tell them the same thing every time. Look, at home is a very easy and calm environment. And when you're at a dog school, there is just so much stimulation that you're competing with that it's practically impossible for the dog to actually focus and listen. To me, when I'm teaching a class of puppies or younger dogs, I always tell the handlers, hey, I don't care if your dog does nothing the entire hour. We're not here to train the dog right now, we're here to train you so you can train the dog at home. And even when you're training in the right environment, there's another mistake that can slowly drain progress, and that is that people think more training automatically equals better results. Longer sessions and a lot of repetition, doing something over and over and over again, really drilling it in. But dogs don't learn like that. They don't improve through exhaustion. They improve through clarity and timing. Think about your own focus for a second. After a while it drops and you get slower and sloppier. And dogs are exactly the same. After a few minutes even of very focused training, you start seeing that their responses are getting delayed. And they might even start making mistakes where they before did everything perfectly. And here's the problem. Every mistake that gets repeated gets practiced. And now you're not reinforcing the correct behavior anymore. You're reinforcing the inconsistency. And that becomes the new standard. So instead of improving, you're actually degrading the behavior. And this is why short sessions work so well. Especially with younger dogs, just a couple of minutes of focused, clean and clear exercise, maximum of 10 minutes, and you end on a success and then stop before the dog gets tired, before the behavior drops. Because what you leave them with is what matters the most. You want them to be happy and excited for doing something right. You don't want them to be confused and tired. And that is how you build fast, reliable learning. Yesterday, for example, I was training a search and rescue class to a completely new dog. And after a couple of repetitions, suddenly he sprinted towards the target, clearly using his nose to search the missing person, which is exactly what we want. And usually people will want to continue training after a sudden success like that, to just see how much you can push your dog this session. But we didn't. After that one we just quit, because now the dog has learned. Pushing further risks tiring the dog out and then end on confusion instead of clarity. When I am giving an obedience class, I usually spend only a couple of minutes per exercise, and after 2 to 3 exercises we take a small 2-minute break so the dog can reset. Especially with younger or inexperienced dogs. This is so incredibly important. With dogs that have been training for a couple of months or maybe even a couple of years already, I don't take these breaks anymore, but still, an exercise should never last longer than 10 minutes. Now let's talk about something that's small but extremely powerful. You ask your dog to sit and they sit, so you reward them. But the detail a lot of people miss is the timing. Timing is so crucially important. Exactly when you are rewarding, because when you are rewarding is what you are rewarding. Because to your dog, that matters more than anything else. If your timing is off even by a second or two, you might not even be rewarding the sit at all anymore. Let's say your dog stands up to accept the treat. You might be rewarding the standing up instead. Or what if your dog sits and as you grab the treat, your dog starts looking around? Even just that small action of looking around might be the thing you reward instead. Dogs do not learn from what your intention is. Again, they don't know. They don't know what you want or what you mean. They learn from precision. So if your reward is unclear, then the learning becomes unclear. And unclear learning leads to inconsistent behavior. And this is where a simple marker comes in. A simple yes or a clicker, used at the exact moment the dog does something that you want to reward, and suddenly that moment becomes crystal clear. That right there, that is what you are being rewarded for. And now learning speeds up dramatically, because you've removed the guesswork. You've made the communication a lot sharper and more precise. And once your dog understands exactly what earned the reward, progress becomes so much faster. I always personally recommend using a clicker over a clicker word, unless you are already very experienced with dogs. Just because a clicker is so much clearer than a word, because your voice might change depending on the time of day, You might use your word in a conversation outside of training, or multiple people might be training the same dog. This also does not mean that you can just start using the clicker right now in your training and your dog will know what he gets rewarded for. First, you need to teach your dog that the clicker means that a reward is coming. So outside of training, you just click and reward, click, reward, click, reward, over and over and over again, until after a while you see that when you click, your dog anticipates a reward. Once you have that, you see that your dog anticipates a reward, that's the moment that you can start using your clicker in training. And even when your dog listens to commands perfectly, that does not mean that your dog's behavior or mindset changed. Most people train their dog something like this. The dog does something and the owner reacts by giving a command. Sit, down, leave it, come, whatever, all day long. And the dog might listen perfectly, but there's still a hidden problem. The dog only behaves after you tell them to, and that means you're not actually training the behavior, you are managing it in real time. And that creates a very fragile system, because what happens when you're not around, or when you're not paying attention? Then that behavior just falls apart, because the dog has never learned what to do on their own. So instead of a dog that sees something and chooses to stay calm, you get a dog that sees something and reacts until it gets a command to do otherwise. And that's always one step too late, because what you actually want is building default behavior. A dog that automatically checks in with you, a dog that chooses to stay with you instead of running after a wild animal, without needing constant commands. And that's what makes a dog feel easy. How that actually gets built is not through commands, but through reinforcement of choices. Small ones, constantly. You're walking and your dog looks at you on their own. Most people ignore that, but you really shouldn't. That's the exact moment that matters. That's a check-in. And if you reward that, you will build more of it. And now the dog starts offering attention without even being asked. Or like the example with my own dogs. If they see a distraction, but they don't react immediately, even if there's only a split second of hesitation, that moment is worth more than gold. And if you mark and reward that moment, you reinforce the calm decision making. And now the dog has learned that I don't need to react to everything. What most people accidentally reinforce, like the dog reaching something after getting pulled, or getting interaction after jumping up, those behaviors become default. Not because the dog chose them, but because they worked. Even if you did not command them to jump up, you can also use that to your benefit. Stop only rewarding when you ask for something and start rewarding when your dog offers the right behavior. That's how you move from command-based control to behavior-based reliability. And the results are great. You don't need to say as much, you don't need to react as fast or even keep your eye on your dog all the time. The dog starts making better decisions before you even step in. And finally, the last mistake that ties everything together. A lot of people focus heavily on physical exercise. Long walks, running, playing fetch, and yet the dog is still restless, still reactive, still just not settling when you get home. Because physical fatigue is only part of the picture. Mental fatigue is what actually creates calm behavior. A dog that only moves builds endurance. So you end up with a dog that can run longer, yeah sure, but not a dog that can settle. And that's where mental stimulation comes in, mental work. Training your dog, problem solving, scent work. Especially scent work, because scent engages the dog at a very deep and natural level. It requires focus, processing, decision making, and it drains the dog's energy in a completely different way. 10 minutes of scent work can do way more than an hour-long walk. Put your dog in its crate and eye treats all around the house. Try to do some detection work. There's just so many fun ideas online that you can try out to tire your dog out mentally, and it's just like us humans. Running a couple of miles will tire you out at first, but keep doing it every day and after a while you don't even feel it anymore. But spend the day in class, mentally paying attention, and at the end of the day, you are most likely drained. If you look at these 10 mistakes, there's a pattern. Most of them aren't about the dog doing something wrong, they're about miscommunication, unclear signals, inconsistent rules, unintentional reinforcement. And once you fix those things, everything changes. Because training stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling predictable, clear and logical for both you and your dog. And that's when progress really starts happening. So thank you all for watching. If you have any questions at all, let me know in the comments and I will get back to you, I promise. Please subscribe and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.